Shabbat Shalom. I want to make sure that you can hear me in the center of the synagogue and that you can understand me. I'm not sure if it's my accent or the sound system. So I'm hoping it's a sound system because we're kind of late in the game for it to be my accent. Okay. I was having dinner the other night with my son, and I was telling him how much Yom Kippur really weighs on my shoulders, you know. Like a couple of days before, I really start feeling it. And I get super nervous, and I get anxious. And not because I don't trust myself that everything's going to be okay in the congregation, but it's really a very heavy day. If you take Yom Kippur seriously, this is like a rehearsal of your death. You know, we're dressed in white, we wear kittel, same as when we're going to be buried. And we don't eat. We don't engage in any type of pleasure. So if you take it seriously, it's a tremendously devastating day that ends up being a really uplifting day in the end. It's kind of hard to describe. I was telling somebody, sometimes I wonder what non-Jews feel like in their holidays. Because ours are like, oh my God, you know? And, you know, we don't have any grapes or like we don't hear the bells of the clock. Our New Year is all introspection. And Yom Kippur is really heavy duty. And I know that tomorrow is going to be a very difficult Yizkor for many of us. After the year that we went through, there is no way that Yizkor tomorrow is not going to be different and poignant and deep. So tonight I wanted to do something that kind of like would let us step away from everything we've been living through in the past year. And I became increasingly convinced that it was important. When Josh, having dinner with me, told me that he was waking up for an entire year at 3 o'clock in the morning checking the news. I said, funny, I do the same thing. I thought it was the age, you know. You get to be, after a certain age, you don't sleep that well, you check the news. But apparently, last year, many of us have been doing this. So for one night, I want to be able to create a space where we don't even think about the news. And I decided that instead of speaking about something momentous, or about something that's happening in the world right now, I want to speak about something that for us is eternal. And that's really studying a little Torah with you, which I don't think there's a better night to do that than tonight. When I was a little kid, my father had me convinced that the most important verse in the Torah was honor your father and your mother. He would say to me, what's the most important verse in the Torah? I'd say, honor your father and your mother. And then, as I was about to go to rabbinical school, what's the most important verse in the Torah? Honor your father and your mother. So things really didn't change for me. But then I go to rabbinical school. And I realized there's a whole discussion in the Talmud about which one is the most important verse in the Torah. The rabbis actually debate this because apparently for them it was really life or death. They really needed to know which was the most important verse in the Torah because nothing can be superfluous. And if nothing in the Torah is superfluous, how can there be one verse that's better than the rest? So the discussion goes something like this in the Talmud. First of all, Rabbi Akiva says, "Ve'afta l'recha kamocha," zeklal gadol b'Torah. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's the most important thing in the entire Torah. As a matter of fact, he said, if you do that, it's like fulfilling all of the mitzvot. But then comes another Rabbi, Ben Azai, and he says, no. He says, Ele Sefer Toldot Adam. This is the book of the generations of Adam. That's in Genesis. And he says that is important, the most important, because it teaches us that we all are created in the image of God, and no one is better than anybody else. Wow. These are actually eternal lessons. These are lessons that if I would say I would pick any one of these verses to be the most important, we all would say, okay, Dayenu, let's go home. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there. It would be too simple. So here comes another midrash, where Ben Zoma says the most important verse, of course, is the Shema Israel. How can we not say the most important verse is that we only have one God, especially when we live in a world where we're surrounded by pagans? And then another one of the rabbis, Ben Nanas, says, no, it's like Rabbi Akiva, Ve'afta l'recha kamocha. So now we have 2 votes for that one. But here comes Shimon ben Pazi, another one of the rabbis, 1,600 years ago, completely out of left field, and he says the most important verse in the Torah, Ve'amarta lahem ze aishe asher takrivu l'Adonai kevasim b'nei shana tmimim shnaim layom ola tamid. If you recognize this, we read it every Rosh Chodesh. Et hakebes ha'echad taseh b'boker v'et hakebes ha'echad taseh ben arba'im. What is that? Well, God says to the people of Israel, you have to bring 2 offerings every day. Every day you have to bring a keves, a lamb in the morning, and every day a lamb at twilight. This is the most important verse in the Torah. That's kind of weird. Let us just put that out there. It's like the most anticlimactic text that you've ever expected to encounter. But what's the explanation? What's the explanation? So one of the rabbis of the Talmud gets up and says, it is the most important verse in the Torah because it teaches you that if you do something constantly and you do it well, you become a giant. Nothing can stand in your way. Only when you have constancy, and only when you do it all the time, day in and day out, even if you're tired, do you really understand your own potential. Now, I have to tell you, I have one of my colleagues that says the most important verse in the Torah is Shmor et nafshecha meod. Take care of your soul, guard your soul. Because in the world in which we live, with everything that's going on, you have to guard your soul, not to become like the haters. But I really like that verse about the lambs, because I really believe that in the world in which we live, we need people to learn constancy and perseverance. We need people to actually understand that things that are worth something in life are not instantaneous. They don't happen overnight. I've told you this story before, but I'll do it again. It's one of my favorite stories. Believe it or not, I was 100 pounds heavier. Yes, if that's possible, I was. And I went to the doctor to see if I was going to have the gastric bypass. And he sent me to another doctor to qualify me for the insurance. And that doctor, who ended up becoming one of my close friends, says to me, we don't really have statistics. You really shouldn't do it. But if you work with me, I'll get you to lose 1 pound a week. I said, doctor, that's 100 weeks. Well, look, you've lived like this for all your life. What's 100 weeks more? I said, okay. And we did it. And I'm forever grateful. And yes, I gain 20 back, I lose them again. You know how that goes. But really taught me perseverance that I never had. And I said to him, I just want to lose 100 pounds by tomorrow. He says, that doesn't happen, only in the movies. I'm never going to forget that. That's why that verse of the Olat Tamid, of bringing the sacrifice twice a day, every day, is so important. Because of course it cannot compete with loving everybody. And of course it cannot compete with Shema Israel. But only if you have constancy in your life can you understand the other verses. Only if you know who you are, you can love another human being. Only if you're good at what you do, you can appreciate how good the other ones are around you. That's why it's so important. Preparing this sermon, I happened upon a YouTube interview of Kobe Bryant. This, by the way, is the last thing I ever expected to find for my sermon. Now you have baseball the second day of Rosh Hashanah and basketball on NIdre, right? By the way, when I grew up, and I still love soccer, and when you play soccer, either you have it or you don't. Either you're Messi or you're not, right? Messi was born Messi. I mean, Pelé was born Pelé. Maradona was born Maradona, for better or for worse. Kobe Bryant, in that interview, said the following. I was bewildered by this. He said, I was the worst basketball player as a kid. I was horrible. And I had a coach who told me, you have to come every day for 2 hours, and first you practice your 2 shots, then your 3s, and then we'll get you in physical condition. So he says, it took me years, but I really wanted to be good. So Kobe Bryant was not born the greatest. He had to make himself, Zichrono Libracha, into one of the greatest. And then, by the way, he spent a fortune in summer camps for children to teach them how to play basketball 1 day at a time. You do not become Magic Johnson overnight. You don't. You have to practice and practice and practice. That's bringing that Olah Tamid, that sacrifice every day. Yom Kippur, dear friends, gives us a chance, unlike no other day, to say to ourselves, tomorrow night when I walk out of here, I'm going to be better at what I'm doing than anybody else. I'm going to be a better father. I'm going to be a better child. I'm going to be a better partner. I'm going to be a better listener. And we can only do that by training ourselves, by catching ourselves when we don't do it, and saying to ourselves, we have to do it. You know, in Yom Kippur, we talk about forgiveness. The most important part of forgiveness is forgiving yourself. And then giving yourself a chance to start again and to persevere by hard work. Somebody asked me the other day, why do we go through Netane Tokef? You know, mi yamut, mi yeh, who will live, who will die, who by fire, who by sword. Why do we go through that? Don't we believe that we as Jews have the power to change our life? So what is it? Do we have the power to change? Or everything's decreed by God? I think that one of the biggest mistakes we could do was to take that prayer in the Tane Tokef out of the Machzor. Because the last line, which comes on the next page in this Machzor, that says, Tefillah, Teshuvah, and Tzedakah, that's the most important line of the prayer. It says prayer, repentance, and charity, or justice. That averts the severity of God's decree. So we go through the whole litany of what God has in store for us. And then we say, we believe that even at the very last moment, we can change God's mind. And the only way we change God's mind is by God seeing us try and try and try, bringing that olah, that sacrifice, day in and day out, day in and day out. Emerson once wrote, if you fail, try again, and if you fail, fail again, and fail better the next time. But never stop trying. Failure is part of life, but become constant, and one day you will overcome failure. One of my dear professors in rabbinical school, Professor Yochanan Mofs, was one of these, literally one of these giants, one of these geniuses that used to teach at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He was a Bible teacher. And he, in his youth, people say that he used to get on top of the desk and stand on the desk and jump from the desk and go to the blackboard and literally deconstruct the Torah and write a verse here and a verse there and a verse there and flip it around. And when I got to his class, Dr. Mofs had already very advanced Parkinson's disease. So when I was his student, he came every day in a wheelchair. There was no standing on the desk. There was no moving his arms. There was no writing on the blackboard. He was a genius. One day I noticed that when he got off the wheelchair and his attendant would bring him into the class because he refused to walk into the class or to be wheeled into the class. He needed to walk into the class. He would count his steps and he would go, Echad, Echad ve'echad, Echad ve'shtayim, Echad ve'shalosh. And I couldn't believe it. You know who else counts like that? The high priest on Yom Kippur, when he goes into the Kodesh HaKodashim and he sprinkles the blood. So Professor Moffs used to consider teaching so holy that he instilled in it the same intensity as the Kohen HaGadol on Yom Kippur. And only by reciting the numbers as he walked was he able to bring himself from the wheelchair to the desk chair. Never give up. Count what you must, but keep on doing it. Never give up. If you give up, you will not find out what you were capable of doing. And look, there are people all around us that tell us, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, you should be here, you should be there. Listen to your heart. Today, tonight, this is the day when we listen to our hearts. There's a beautiful story about a traveler who gets to a train station and he's carrying 3 suitcases, one on each arm and one under his arm. And he asks, excuse me, is there a porter around here that can help me? Oh, yeah, his name is Johnny. He's on the other side of the track. So he walks and he finds Johnny, and Johnny is dead asleep. He's like completely gone. He says, excuse me, sir, are you Johnny? Yeah, what do you want? Could you please wake up and help me with my bags? I really need help. Yeah, in a second. Just leave them there. I'll meet up with you in the train. Just leave them there. You know, he says, you should buy a motorcycle. A motorcycle? Yeah, if you had a motorcycle, when people bring you their bags, you can put them in a little cart behind the motorcycle. And then you could charge more money, and it wouldn't be so bothersome to you to get up. Aha, says Johnny. A motorcycle. And then what, he says? Well, and then with all that money, one day, you'll be able to not work and just rest. He says, so what does it look to you like I'm doing right now? So we all have wise people that want to change our lives. There's only one way of changing our lives. Be better at who you are. Look at yourself in the mirror. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, today is the day that I change, that tomorrow starts, and that I will return not only to God, but to myself. Gmar Chatima Tova, Shabbat Shalom. I hope that this year for all of us is a year of peace, both spiritually and physically. A year of joy, a year of blessings, and a year of health. Shana Tova.